Today on our 2018 Ford Focus, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the Roadmaster Diode 7-wire to 6-wire Flexo-Coil wiring kit, part number RM-15267. Keep in mind that the wiring is only going to be one piece of a safe, complete flat tow setup. You'll also need a base plate, tow bar, and a braking system. Whenever we're flat towing our Focus, it's going to be important that our lights are going to match the same things that are going on with our motorhome. Because whether we're slowing down and our brake lights come on, or if we're changing lanes, we want all the other drivers to know what's going around us so we can all be safe. Our diode packs are going to allow us to take those signals from our RV and transfer them into the factory bulbs. We're not going to have to worry about those magnetic lights and then another step every time that we flat tow. It's going to be a simple one-time installation, and it's not going to change the exterior of our Focus at all. A big benefit to the diodes is the fact that it's going to protect our Focus and the electrical system. It's going to keep any kind of backfeeding or any kind of other electrical issues that may arise on the motorhome end from causing any issues on our car. Our diode kit is going to come with everything we need. All the diodes, the wiring, as well as a 6-way round plug for our vehicle end, and an umbilical cord that's going to have the 6-way round on one end and a 7-way RV style on the other end. So now we've seen the end result and gone over some of the features of our diode kit, let's show you how to get it installed. I do want to mention that we have our fascia and headlights removed because we just got done installing the base plate, so routing the wires up front is going to make it that much easier. So we're just going to find the end of our 4-pole wiring and we're going to route it down just to the outside of our air box, come underneath, and we're going to follow this path going down to the bottom towards the fascia and the bumper by our base plate. And then we can route it over towards the center where we're going to have our electrical connectors. I'm just going to pass my wires over and then make sure I leave myself enough excess slack so that I can wire everything up. And to make sure I'm not going to pull on it or get it tangled up and come loose, I'm just going to wrap it around one of these posts to make sure I have that slack there. And then we can come back and zip tie everything up. Now that I have a general idea of how much wire I'm going to have up front here, I'm going to take the wire loom that's provided in our kit. I'm just going to run my wire into it, and that's just going to help protect the wire and kind of keep those bright colors down on the front of the vehicle. We don't need to use all of it up here, so we'll just slide it up till we get to about where the wire is. Then we can cut our loom and secure it to the front of the wires and tape it, make sure it doesn't slide around on us. Just leave ourselves a little bit of excess so we can still access the wires. So with our wire routed up towards our firewall and the other end at the front, we're going to take the end of our wire and we're going to pass it down so it can go underneath the car and we can route it towards our taillights. Now this may be a little bit of a reach, kind of hard to get to, but if you can, try to go behind some of the brake lines and things to keep it away from the front of the motor and keep it close to the firewall. And we're going to start passing it down. Now you may have to readjust the wire once you get it down below to make sure it is following the path you want it to, because you don't want to be hitting any hot pieces of metal or any moving parts. Just want to be able to drop that wire down so it's not going to get rubbed on anything or catch anything. So we'll drop it down as much as we can, and then we'll go underneath to make sure that it's routed in a proper way. So once we have a hold of our wire, we can start pulling the excess slack down. You want to make sure you pull all the slack down, and it's not a bad idea to go back up top and double check and make sure it didn't get wadded up there. With our wire dropped down on the bottom side, we're going to route this towards the back bumper so we can eventually meet up with our tail lights. So I'm going to go ahead and run this and then I'll show you how I routed it. So my wire came down right by my subframe here. I went over this cross member brace underneath this cover. I just followed it along and until it came out of the cover. And then I went over to the outside behind the heat shield so I could stay away from the exhaust. Followed it up over the subframe. And then again, tucking it behind the heat shield here until it came out right by my rear bumper. Now you just want to make sure you secure your wires with the included zip ties, and if you need to, go ahead and pull that heat shield bolt or the panel bolts down, tuck your wire in, and then put your wires back so we don't have to worry about it falling down and causing any issues. Now with our wire all the way back here, we're going to need to separate each one of our wires as high as we can get it. So if we just grab our wire and we kind of pull on one, we're going to want to separate the wire all the way back. We'll do that for each one of them. So with all the wires separated, we're going to go ahead and set them aside, and we're going to move out top so we can remove our taillight assemblies. If we open up our trunk, on each side we're going to have this plastic access panel. You're going to want to reach behind it. You can just grab it, pull it out, and set it aside. Now inside that panel we're going to see these two turn knobs, and that's what's going to be holding our taillight in place. So we can loosen them up, but if you're having a little bit of trouble loosening them by hand, we can grab a pair of pliers. So we just go on either side, give it a quick turn. Should loosen up enough to where we can remove it by hand now. You don't want to do too much with the pliers because these are just plastic wing nuts and we don't want to damage them trying to get them out. When both those removed, we're going to pull very slightly outward, just enough to get your hand behind this black plastic on the taillight assembly, and then we're going to pull straight back and pull our taillight out. Now we're going to have a few different bulbs in here, so we're going to want to twist them counterclockwise, and we can remove them, and we'll unhook our wires from the taillight assembly, and we'll set the assembly aside where it won't get damaged. So we can move to the other side and remove that one as well. So a quick tip, you're going to need to close your trunk so that the lights can go out. And currently we have our headlights on so we can find our taillight signal. So I'm going to take my circuit tester here and I'm going to test each one of these wires going into the bulb that's lit so we can figure out which wire is going to be for our taillights. So it looks like the purple wire is going to be for our taillight signal, but we'll go ahead and check the orange and black wire to make sure we're not getting a signal there. So the purple wire is going to be our taillight signal, so we're going to go ahead and repeat that and find the wire on the passenger side as well. So now I went ahead and turned my taillights off so we can isolate the circuit, and I have somebody pushing on the brake pedal so that I can get my brake signal. Now keep in mind you're going to have the key on to have the brake lights illuminate. So if we come to the bulb and socket that it's coming to, we'll go ahead and start testing these wires. So the brake signal on the left-hand side is going to be the yellow wire. So we'll go over to the passenger side and test for that over there. Now in order to get our connections made, we're going to have to bring the wires from the bottom up to our taillight harness. To help me out, I'm going to use a piece of airline tube that I had laying around. I'm going to go in between the body here and the bumper. I'm just going to feed it down until I can reach the wires underneath. Now if you don't have an airline tube, that's fine. You can use whatever you have available, even if it is just a coat hanger. Something that's just going to hold its shape when you start pushing down on it. So since we're over on the driver's side, we're going to be working specifically with the yellow and brown wire. Well, we're going to leave the green and white wire at the bottom for now, and we're going to find the end of the yellow and brown wire, and I'm going to tape it to the airline tube that came down from underneath the bumper. And then we can pull the other end of our airline tube and bring our wires up. And once you have your wires starting to come up, we're going to pull all the slack out and make sure it didn't get stuck underneath. And with our yellow and brown wire up, I'm actually going to zip tie the top of them to the very top of the harness here so I don't have to worry about it falling back down and going back underneath the bumper. So we'll just pull all the slack through and we'll secure it as high as we can. So we're going to start with our yellow wire, which is going to be our brake signal and our left-hand turn signal. And if we remember, it's also going to be the yellow wire that's coming off of our vehicle. So we'll find our wire, and I'm going to come down pretty close to the end that goes into the vehicle, and I'm going to cut that wire in half. And we're going to strip back both ends. And then we're going to want to grab one of our diodes that has all the blue connectors on it, and we're going to crimp in place one connector for each side of that wire. And if we look at our diode, it's going to be labeled in, and there's going to be 2 terminals and 1 out terminal. The out terminal is going to be going towards our taillight socket. So we'll take the end that's closest to it and plug it in. And then the end that's farthest from it is going to be going into the in terminal. Then we can estimate how much wire we need to reach the other terminal from our yellow wire, cut it, and strip back the end. And we'll remove the last terminal on our diode and crimp it on. So our brake and left turn signal should look like this. We're going to have our yellow wire from our 4-pole wiring coming into the in, as well as the factory wire coming from the vehicle side from the in, going out to our taillight socket. Now for our taillight signal on the left-hand side, we're going to be using the diode that has the yellow connector on it. So we can find our taillight wire, which is going to be the purple wire. And again, we'll come pretty far back so we have enough room to work with. We'll cut our wire and strip back both ends. So again, we're just going to kind of estimate about how much brown wire we need to reach it, giving ourselves a little bit of extra. And then we're going to cut back our wire, except this time you want to hold on to the excess wire and strip back the excess as well as the end that we just cut. So now we're going to take both the wires and we're going to twist them together. And then we're going to take the yellow terminal, which is going to be a little bit bigger, and put both the wires inside and crimp it in place. And that will go into the other in terminal on our taillight signal. And now we're going to take our brown wire that has the excess with the free end on it. We're going to find the end of it and we're going to pass it back down to the body so it can meet up with our green wire. So you may need to use that fish wire or your airline tube, or you may be able to just drop the wire down and reach it at the bottom. So now we're going to take our green wire and our brown wire and we're going to route it behind the bumper here. Just want to make sure that you go behind the bumper supports and try to keep it tucked as high as you can and away from the muffler. And we're going to go over to the passenger side and bring our wires up using the same method. With our brown and green wire brought up to the top, we're going to do the same process of hooking them up. Our green wire is going to be for our brake and our turn signal, and our brown wire is going to be for our taillight signal. On the back of our diodes, we're going to have some double-sided foam tape. If we remove the backing, we'll be able to stick it to a nice flat surface. Now, ideally, you're going to want to get them down as low as you can so they're not going to be in the way of our taillight assemblies going back in. But you need to make sure that you have enough room for the bulbs to be plugged back in as well. So if you can, just kind of move the wires out of the way and try to get them as low as possible against the body here. It may take a little bit of maneuvering, but we should be able to tuck them in just right down in between the body and the fascia here. And that should give us enough room so we can get our taillight back in place. So we'll go ahead and do that for the other side. So we can put our lights back in place. Just make sure they lock in all the way. And we can line up the alignment pins and push our taillight back into place and replace those 2 turn knobs on the inside. And when we put these two black plastic turn knobs back on, we don't need to really crank on them or use pliers to put them back in place. You just want to make sure they're nice and snug and that it's threaded in all the way. We'll put our cover back in and we'll replace the other side as well. So we should have one more wire, and that's going to be that white wire left over. This is going to be our ground, and in our kit they do provide us with a ring terminal as well as a self-tapping screw. So I'm going to reach my wire back over this direction towards the front, estimate about how much wire I'm going to need, and cut the excess off and strip back the end of the wire. Then we can take that ring terminal, slide it over our wire, and crimp it in place. I'm going to take that self-tapping screw and a 5/16 nut driver, and I'm going to attach it directly to the bottom of this sheet metal here over on the driver's side. You just want that ring terminal to be tight enough that that wire isn't going to move around on that ring terminal, but you don't want it to strip it out to where it will be loose. Now we did have to do a little bit of trimming on our fascia, and the easiest way to do it is if you just hold the fascia as close as possible to the factory location and use a paint marker or some kind of marker to mark out where our arms as well as all of our electrical connectors or anything else that's going to be coming through the fascia needs to be trimmed. So with everything trimmed, we can go ahead and get ready to put our fascia back into position. Just want to line everything up as close as you can. You may have to guide everything through. Make sure the clips by the headlights are pushed in all the way and lock back in, and that'll hold it enough so that we can get the rest of the hardware and the other clips in place. Now the easiest way to trim this, since it is just plastic, you can take a pair of tin snips and just cut the plastic, and right here where our electrical connector is coming through, we're going to have to just trim a little bit of this area in between the two posts, because even though the posts come through, our plug has to have enough room to go back. So we'll just trim a couple of these crossbars here and take that center section out. Now we'll have plenty of room once we mount our plug to get everything in there. We can plug our headlights back in and make sure that they're sitting in the right position. Get them loosely lined up, make sure we can get the hardware back in. And we'll go ahead and put the other side in, get our hardware loosely in place. We don't lose it, and then we can come back and tighten it all up. Then we can start putting the rest of the hardware back in. With these push pins, you want to push that outer area in first and then lock it down by pushing in the center section. And replace all the hardware in the wheel well. And don't forget to replace that push pin that's at the very top corner of where our fender meets our fascia. You want to make sure you put all the fasteners back on the bottom of that skid plate, the two Torx bits on each side, as well as all the push pin fasteners. Now we can take our hood release cable, and you're going to take the little stopper in there and you're going to feed it into the large section, and then just kind of push the cable down so that it'll trap it in there, and then take the plastic piece, line up that little ridge on there, push it down until it locks in, and we follow along, clipping it back into place, just kind of routing it back. Then we're going to take this end of the cable, and it may help to kind of pull on the cable a little bit, but we're going to feed it into that channel so that the cable can go in there. Then kind of wrap it back around till we can get the plastic piece pushed in as well. And just go back and check and make sure that it's functioning and all the clips are clipped in the proper position. So now that we have our fascia back in place, we can go and wire up our plug. So we're going to need to separate our wires. You can just take a pair of cutters. You just want to cut in between the wires. We don't need to separate as much this time, just enough to work with and strip the wire. And we're going to strip the end of each one of these wires. You're going to want to grab your plug, and on the back we're going to have this rubber dust cover. We're going to pull that off, and we'll feed our wires through the small end. And then for now, we're just going to push it back out of the way so we have room to work with these wires. Now if we look at the back of our plug here, each one of these terminals is going to be labeled. If we start at the top, it's going to be TM for trailer marker, which will be our brown wire. And then going to the left, it'll be GD for ground, which will be the white wire, LT for left turn, which will be our yellow wire, and then finally RT for right turn, which is going to be our green wire. There's going to be a small screw. Go ahead and use a Phillips screwdriver to loosen it up. You don't need to pull them all the way out, you just want to loosen it up so that we have room so that we can get our wires in place. And then we'll take our wire, and you want to put the bare wire in there, and typically I like to leave just a little bit sticking out, that way the insulation doesn't cause any issues later on and cause any kind of bad connections. So we'll put our wire in, and then we'll screw that set screw down, and we'll repeat that for the rest of our wires. With our connections made on the back, before I slide my dust cover back in place, I'm going to take some dielectric grease and just kind of fill this area up. And that'll help keep out any moisture and prevent corrosion from building up. And once that's nice and filled up, we can take our dust cover, slide it back over our plug. And I always like to take a little bit of tape and wrap that dust cover in the back of the plug. Make sure no moisture, debris, or anything else is going to get in there, and make sure it also stays in place. Now on our base plate we do have those tabs. We're just going to line up our plug and take some self-tapping screws and secure it directly to the base plate. Now one final step in our wiring is to test everything to make sure all the functions are working properly. So I have a tester hooked up to simulate my motorhome, and when I run through the functions, we can see my taillights are coming on, as well as my left turn signal, my brake lights, and my right turn signal. All we have left to do now is hook up to the motorhome and hit the road. And that'll finish up your look at the Roadmaster Diode 7-wire to 6-wire wiring kit, part number RM-15267 on our 2018 Ford Focus.